Okay, my name is Rick Ciotti. The shop name is Slicks, S-L-I-X. What we're looking at today is a 58 Impala that came into my hands about 6 or 7 months ago. And the car itself is a bit of a time capsule. It appeared to be dated. There were several little indicators that led me to believe that. I'll get to that in a minute. But basically, this car's been sitting for years and years and years. And had it not been kept inside all those years, it wouldn't be in as good a shape as it is. And not that that's great shape. What did happen to this car that probably answers why it was sitting since the late 60s, early 70s, is it was hit really hard on the passenger side, and it was hitting the frame area. The frame was completely destroyed. And although I had another frame that I could have easily put back under this car, I opted not to because I had some stuff in my junkyard that I've always wanted to use. One of the parts was a 1951 Chevrolet half-ton pickup straight axle. So I figured since the front part of the frame was damaged, I'd just cut it off and we'd put the tubing in place and build a straight axle. When I got around to that, I started looking at YouTube, which, by the way, I'm not a big fan of because there's so much misinformation on there. So I decided to do some YouTube exposure for you guys because it was very lacking in dealing with straight axles. I'm not one to use a kit. I don't want any of this Chinese stuff on the car. I want to use junk, old stuff, and I want to do it the old-fashioned way. So that's what I set out to do. So now that we're inside here, and I apologize for this being after the fact, but I only trust one person in the world to do the video part of this thing, and that's Paul. He's behind the camera right now, and he was out of pocket. He was actually down in Mexico, so I went full steam ahead on this thing, and although it's late in the game, hopefully that my explanation will make that clear. What we did was we cut the old Impala frame off, probably actually about here. I wanted to leave as much of this on here as I could, so I cut it really close to the control arms, which coincidentally was the area of damage. So I cut that off. Maybe we'll get a shot of that in a little bit. Basically threw it away, put it out front. And what we did was I came back and cleaned this off on both sides where I did want the sectioning to actually be, and I angle cut it, right? It's on about a 70-degree angle, and I got 10 feet of 2-inch by 5-inch by 1/4-inch thick tubing, square tubing, to put in here. So I put a 5-foot piece on this side, and I put a 5-foot piece on that side. And there were just 2 rails sticking straight out. What we've done after that was come back in here and I put a piece of 1/2-inch plate. I don't know if you can see the step from where you're at there. There's a step where this is out farther than this. This is the original 2-inch tubing. This is 1/2-inch steel. And I drilled pilot holes through this steel plate, even going back into here, the original part of the frame. I reshaped one end to fit down and follow that curve. And we put that in there and I welded through the pilot holes into this tubing in all those areas and continued the welds out in the original portion of the frame so that it would add strength. But welded all the way around here. It's stronger than hell. I don't think it's ever going to come loose. Comes all the way out at that same level, and then we had to dip it down here because we had to make a transition to get the frame, the end leg, back to its 27-inch point. That's the magic number I was looking at. And we haven't put the shackle mounts on yet, but when we do, the shackles will have another piece of steel added in here, but it's already 27 inches down here. So this will be a stationary mount for the leaf spring, and this will be a pivoting shackle at this end right here. There's also a little bit of a mathematical thing going on with the shackles. They need to actually tilt a little bit here so that they can work without binding or without flipping over, right? I'll get into that on a video in the future when I actually do that. We also had the radiator support to deal with, which is up front here. Okay, so this is another reason for the transition and the drop, was for the radiator support here. That's going to give you your regulation and adjustment on the whole front end of the car. We took a piece of 2-inch by 2-inch block, cut it open. You can see a nut in there that's welded to a washer on the outside and welded to the top. Pretty rudimentary, but these are actually going to go on here, and this is one that we'd made earlier that we won't use the same one. It'll be a little bit more improved than this, but basically this is going to go in under here And then a rubber bushing is going to sit on top of that. Right here is something else I had laying around. And this will have a steel sleeve in it that gives it a locating point for the hole here. The adjustment that'll happen in there will happen between the size of the bolt we use, which is a 7/16, and this hole, which is 7/8. So there's slop all the way around. That'll give us finite adjustment for the front fenders and the whole front end of the car. You got to have some sort of rubber or urethane on there, otherwise you're going to have vibration. I wanted to show you the underside. Keeping things straight, or taking something, in this case was bent up, and getting it straight is important. So along with the tools, you're going to use little levels and longer levels and whatnot to get everything level as you're welding. But then when it comes to the straightness thing, what I've done here, first of all, I've got original tram gauges that we used to use back when we used to do collision work, and I added some 3/16 all thread to those things to make them long. And I hung one on the back of the chassis in known marks that are the same on both sides, channels, holes, there'll be indentations or places to do that with, right? And the purpose of that was to find the center. So I found the center at the very rear of the car, right underneath the rear bumper. I found the center in the center of the frame. This particular car's got an X frame, so it comes together in an X fashion in the very center. And I hung a rod there. And then at the front here, I just took a string with a spring on it, just some weight, and I made a plumb bob. So as we're doing this, you can visually step back from the car, and using one eye, when you can get those to all align as one, then you're straight. If you can't achieve that, then you have to find out where you're off and make it right. So this car was thought to have a bent frame. After all, we knew the frame had been smashed and it was dented. We thought we cut most of that out and straightened out the rest. But we were still getting bad lines, right? We couldn't get these things straight. So come to find out, through another accident that it was in, or got knocked sideways and occurred at the same time, it got hit on the driver's side. And that resulted in the body getting knocked out of center on the body mounts. So it turned out it wasn't a bent frame. It was the body misaligned to the frame. So you've basically got two rectangles. You've got a frame and you've got a body, and both of those have to be the same. They have to make it straight, they have to be the same. And I can tell you that from years and years of doing framework on some of these later model vehicles, if you make the bad decision up front, you're going to regret it, because once you bend something, it's harder than hell to put it back. So we straightened out the body, we got our lines to all line up, and we also ran a string line that you can see the bottom of the string here that goes up from the center of the body itself, minus the chassis. So for all of our sheet metal to line up straight and to also line up with the frame in center, we can measure off that string line to our frame rails and to other things to make sure that the body is actually sitting square on the chassis. That's how we did it. Really rudimentary, really easy, and I'm kind of a simple person when it comes to that. And so you can do a lot with a tape measure. You don't need any fancy equipment. These laser guided frame machines, I guess they're all well and good for the people that sell those damn things, but you can do a lot with a $10 tape measure. So once we did all that and got it squared up, one of the final things that we did was we added a front cross member in here, and that's to give the legs some side-to-side strength and make it rigid all the way around. What we noticed too in fitting the bumper, some of the channel or the tubing that we put in here is actually exposed under the bumper, and we don't want that. So what we haven't done yet, and we will get more video on it after we do it, we're going to angle cut the end of this, and then we're going to cap it all off so water doesn't get in here and rust out this chassis, so that you won't be able to see that. I think you can see about that much underneath the bumper. So we're going to clean that stuff up as well. I've got some other stuff here that I'd like to share with you guys. Okay, so now more on a body and paint type thing. You can see here where the front end's already been ground down to bare metal. I like to use 24 grit, which is going to shock people, and I'm sure there's not a lot of YouTube people that would agree with me. But 24 grit, especially with the old nitrocellulose lacquer, works really, really well. And the heavier the grit, the cooler the panel will stay. And there's not a lot of parts out for these cars, so I don't want to bend up panels. The scratching, the deep scratching that you get, is not to, you shouldn't be concerned with that. That's going to give the next thing that goes on here, which will be a Clausen's product, a direct-to-metal rust defender. And that's what anybody should be using on an old car. I don't care what anybody else says, that's the product to use. This will give it a good mechanical attachment. With these newer chemicals, you need a mechanical attachment and you need a chemical attachment, right? So the 24 grit basically shortened up the cycle of getting this all out. In doing it, this top coat of paint, the most recent one that this car ever got, was acrylic lacquer. Underneath it was the old nitrocellulose lacquer. And if you've ever tried to get paint off an old car and it just seems to gum up your sandpaper and stuff, probably because you're either using an acrylic lacquer that's not quite cured like it should be. There's a lot of reasons for that. Or nitrocellulose. Nitrocellulose typically turned into like a crayon consistency, and that would gum up your paper. Another reason I use the 24 grit. This particular car, I told you it was dated. You can see here with the body filler underneath it is like, I mean, it's up to 1 inch or 2 inches thick in some areas. They didn't do any metal work. That was all filled all the way out here with Bondo. That had to be at least 2 inches thick. And all these dents and dings down the door, they didn't bother doing anything with that. They just caked it all with mud, and I probably took off a good part of a gallon just off this door. And that was only the lower portion. What I can tell you is that that probably dates this car too, because back when the guys were working with lead, they understood that the lead couldn't be tinned and you couldn't attach the lead unless the metal was very, very clean, right? So when body filler first came out, these guys were just selling these guys a bill of goods, basically. They implied that you no longer needed to do any of that stuff you were doing when you did lead work. And therefore, you know, you bypassed all those steps and you just caked this magic new product in there and it did the job for you. And that really dates this car, because this has all the hallmarks of somebody coming out of lead, being introduced with Bondo for the first time in their life, and just caking probably 2 or 3 cases of that shit on this car. We're going to take these panels and we're going to straighten them back out. We're going to do it all with Clausen's primer. You can build it up like body filler and actually block it out. So this car probably won't see any Bondo or that kind of filler. One of the byproducts of the Clausen's primer, it's a polyester primer, but it's not to be confused with some of the popular ones like Evercoat and 3M that are out there. This is a real polyester primer. It builds, I personally used it more than 1/4 of an inch thick on a car to get it to block out straight. And the analogy I'll use is, why would you go back and mix Bondo, come back, plaster it on a car, go back and mix some more, come back, plaster it on, come back, back, and then have to sand all that stuff afterwards when you could spray it on, right? The Clausen's is different than all the rest because it is a true direct-to-metal, complete metal. It's got self-etch in it, and it's waterproof. So there's a whole bunch of reasons not to use anything else. Use Clausen, C-L-A-U-S-E-N-S. Anybody that really knows body and paint work and wants to warranty the car for life, that's what they use. Okay, a little bit more about the body and paint side of things. Since this car is a time capsule, it's still got all the original lacquer on there. And for those guys out there that are restoring these old cars, they know that you have to take all this old stuff off, take it down to the foundation and put a new foundation on it, right? But I wanted to talk on why you see cars that are so rusty, and if you look at them really close, you'll find that the rust is actually coming through the paint. That's because lacquer is a reversible product. And it's absorbent. It'll absorb moisture out of the air. Epoxy primer is a big thing that most people use, and they think it's all that in a bag of chips. It'll do the same thing. It'll absorb moisture out of the air, and it'll go through down to the metal, start the rust process, and come back through. Before it does that, if you've ever had anything that was epoxy primed outside, you'll notice that it doesn't take long before it gets chalky. That's because it's got no UV protection. So for those reasons, epoxy is definitely out. Do not use epoxy. And I know I'm the only one in the world saying that. That's why we're doing this YouTube. So what you can see right here is you can actually see rust coming through the white. Now this car's got at least 1 acrylic lacquer paint job on it, if not 2 or 3. I found other colors underneath there, and it does have the nitrocellulose lacquer underneath it. And a lot of areas have got excessive amounts of body filler. Body filler and your flavor of the month polyester primer do the same thing as the lacquer and the epoxy primer. They will absorb moisture. When they absorb the moisture, they take it back to the metal starts to rust, and that's why you see rust coming all the way through all of that stuff. So it's a bad foundation, it's a weak foundation, it should never be used, period. We're using the Claustons on here like I mentioned before. That won't do that. Along with that being said, we were all taught to put body filler directly over the metal, and as you can see, that's exactly what they did back over there where the damage is on this car. That was wrong from the get-go. It depends on what part of the country you come from. We're in South Texas right now, and there's a lot of humidity out here. I'm originally from Southern California. If you were going to put body filler over the metal, you could probably get away with it out there, and I'm just as guilty as everybody else. I was taught to do that, and that's the way I did it. If you just have to put body filler on metal, then I do recommend the Claustons body filler. For some of the same reasons, I recommend the Rust Defender primer. It's got self-etch in it, and it will attach to metal, and you don't have the problems with the rusting. You can take a blank piece of metal, you can put it on the ground, even on an arid day out here in Texas, you can light a torch, and you can start moving that torch flame close to that panel. The closer you get to it, the more you'll notice a ring walking away from the torch. That's the ambient humidity that's on that panel at the time. So if you grind a car down to metal and you put body filler on it, where is that humidity? You just sandwiched it between the body filler and the metal panel. Hence, starting the rust process right there. And that's why you shouldn't do it. So I'm not going to do it at all. If I had to do it, I would use the Clauston Z-Glass probably, or a Z-Chrome. Those are some products that they have that won't do that. This car, however, we're going to cut the panels back off that are bent up. We're going to put them through the English wheel. We're going to straighten them out, put the radius back in there that should be in there, and we're going to weld them back on the car. So there won't be a lot of need for that stuff, and any little highs and lows that'll be in there, the Rust Defender will more than do that. So that's the importance of not using a reversible product and the importance of using good products that are out today. Okay, so this will probably be the wrap up for this segment of the 58 Impala. There'll be more to come later, and I apologize for not, doing this right from the get-go and show you exactly what's up. But I'm sure you guys will figure out how to get a hold of me. I've got a website. It's thepaintspot.biz, B-I-Z. Again, my name is Rick Ciotti. What I'll even try to do, and I'm not much into this, but I'll try to take a couple of videos that maybe Paul can splice into what we're going to come up with here on this deal on my little iPhone. I've got to tell you, I've never been into this kind of thing before. I do this stuff. I don't care about making money off this kind of stuff. This will be one of our own cars that we finished out of here. I just had to go up against all the misinformation on YouTube. I want you guys to be able to pull it off. I'm not God. I've been doing this a lot of years. I've got common sense, and I figured if you guys are going to do anything close to this, you need good information. So it was the lack of good information out there that led me to do it. So I'll try to be a little bit more, on top of that stuff as we proceed with this project, okay? Good luck.